we're building up to Easter, focusing on the disciples, and particularly looking at how different followers of Jesus face pressure as the events of the Easter week unfold. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure on them. There's a huge temptation that they have to stop following Jesus. And so this week, as we look at Peter in many ways sort of represents a focal point of that pressure to turn away from Jesus, because specifically we're going to look at Peter's famous or infamous, maybe, betrayal of Jesus. Because we're at the moment where Jesus is facing his trial, the beginning of his trial. And before the rooster crows, Peter disowns Jesus. 3 times, actually, he disowns Jesus. And Jesus is left betrayed. He's left abandoned at his very darkest moment. It's a really hard passage, because betrayal of any sort is a shattering experience. It's devastating to go through. We recognize its destructive power, and even though this is a difficult passage, it is a vital passage, because I think there's an awful lot that we see in it. And let me show you 3 things. We're going to look at the cause of betrayal. We're going to look at the results of betrayal, and then we're going to think about the remedy for betrayal. The cause, the results, and then the remedy. Look at the cause here. Now, of course, betrayal happens for all kinds of different reasons. So I'm not oversimplifying things here. Just in the gospel accounts, actually, you see different people betraying Jesus, turning away from Jesus for different reasons. He's betrayed by many, in fact, by all, really. And if you go into that, you will see that there's lots of different individual causes behind those things. But at the core, there is a common trait. And it's this: betrayal always happens when you think there is an easier pathway or a better pathway. In the moment of betrayal, you think that things will turn out better if you abandon that particular person. In other words, you've made a calculation, and you've calculated that the cost of loyalty is just too high. It's not worth it. Look at Peter here. Let me show you what I mean. Jesus has been brought to trial before the Jewish authorities. Verse 54 says he's in the courtyard of the high priest's residence. And by this point, Jerusalem had become intensely, it was like a pressure cooker. There was expectations, there were massive crowds gathered. This was a time of an enormously significant religious festival. And everyone can see that the events that have begun happening to Jesus, they know that he's in incredible danger. I mean, in many ways, there's only one way that this is going to go with Jesus. It is dark. It is just before dawn. And some of the crowd have lit a fire and they've gathered around the fire. Peter has followed Jesus up until this point, and he sits down with a group that are crowded around the fire. And it's there that you get his 3 denials. They're actually incredibly strong denials. This is in all 4 of the gospel accounts. And every single writer shows you just how strong these are. Peter is recognized by 3 different people as being a follower of Jesus. So in verse 57, he's recognized, and denial number 1, he denies knowing Jesus. So they know who Jesus is. And then in verse 58, denial number 2, he says, well, I'm certainly not a follower of Jesus in any way, shape, or form. And then by verse 60, denial number 3, he just, it's as if he says, I don't know anything at all about any of this. It's kind of just a blanket denial. And the language he uses is powerful language. The other gospel writers tell us that at this point he swore oaths. And he called down curses on himself as he denies Jesus. That's how strong his denial is. This isn't simply I don't know. He's adamant that he knows nothing of Jesus. Now, Peter is facing danger. I mean, let me just paint it out. He's associated with Jesus. He's been seen with Jesus. And you can see his line of thinking. If this is what's happening to Jesus, I'm a follower of Jesus. This surely is going to happen to me as well. And as he faces that pressure, he betrays Jesus. He disowns him. He says, I don't know him. I don't know him at all. There was a cost, there's a risk, there's a threat that he faces for staying loyal that Peter's just not prepared to pay. And his fear leads to this betrayal. The cost is just too great, and he turns away from Jesus. He chooses what in that moment seems to be a better pathway, a safer pathway, an easier pathway. Now, I think when you begin to see it in those terms, it actually becomes more uncomfortable. Because this is not just specific to Peter. This becomes a pressure that understood this way, it's a pressure every single follower of Jesus faces. Now, for us right now, where we live, the cost is not often anything close to being physical. It's certainly not the danger of our lives. That is true for followers of Jesus around the world at this moment, but not for us here. But there are still real costs to following Jesus. There is a daily pressure every single day to deny Jesus, to betray Jesus, to turn away from him, to essentially do what Peter said and say, I don't know him. I don't know what you're talking about. Now, that pressure might simply be something like holding a principle, a teaching of Christianity that will cost you something like respect, that will lead to sneers from somebody, that may even cost you a promotion because you're unwilling to do something. It may cost you a relationship because you're unwilling to compromise on something. Or it may simply be that you just get embarrassed. You don't want people to know. You play down your faith. You pretend you don't have one. Worst case scenario, you actually say, no, that's not me. Christians. Good job, we're not one. Pressure to deny Jesus is always there. But do you know something, strange as this sounds? That's true even if you're not a Christian today. At least the dynamics underneath the heart is the same pressure. What do I mean? See, other people are very often the reason why somebody turns away from Christianity, why somebody doesn't believe. Pressure from the outside. So a person has seen enough of Christianity to begin to be convinced about much of what Jesus says, about much of what Jesus has done, about even who Jesus says he is. But then here's what happens. The thought of that person comes into your mind. And you think, oh, what will they think of me? If they knew that right now I was sitting in a church, if they knew I was right on the cusp of turning to the person next to me and saying, listen, I want to read the Bible more. Or this Easter, I want things to be different because Jesus, I actually believe in what he's saying. But then the picture of friends at school, colleagues at work, that member of the family that you're probably going to see around the dinner table at Easter on the roast dinner, and you can just imagine what they're going to say. Oh, where were you this morning? Yeah, church. Still fear of others. Yeah. Because at that moment, the heart is still saying, no, it's not worth it. There is an easier course to take. There is an easier pathway to walk. Now, maybe that's where you are today. If you do, can I just show you one of the problems with this? Here's the problem. There will always be pressure pushing against belief in Jesus. pushing against staying true and loyal to Jesus, there is always a cost. There is always a cost. And it's never going to go away. So if you think that, oh, if I was just out of that one situation, this specific situation that I was facing, that's the problem. The situation's the problem. When that goes, I'm not going to struggle anymore. Here's what you're going to discover. As soon as you take away the one issue, another one pops up in its place. A different kind of pressure emerges in life. We used to have big moorland fires where I grew up, and they would burn for days and days. And the emergency services would put one out in one area, and it would look like everything was done. But then here's what would happen. The same blaze would reignite a mile further over. And the whole thing would start all over again. It's the same here. See, as soon as you deal with one situation, as soon as you take it away, another just appears in its place. It never goes away. Again, we have to find we're in the situation where we weigh the cost. And all too often we find ourselves saying the same thing we always say. Cost seems too high. But the horrible, horrible irony of this is that even though we do it because we think that this is better for us, we believe in the moment it's a better pathway to take, we always end up in a worse place. Here's the second thing, the results of betrayal. The result of this is devastation. Look at verse 60. Peter replies, "Man, I do not know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. "Before the rooster cries today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and he wept bitterly. It's as if the moment the cockerel crows, Peter suddenly wakes up. He realizes what he's done. And he weeps bitterly. Now that word bitter there is a powerful one. It conveys a sense of agony. This is cut deep to his heart. Peter betrays Jesus to walk what he thinks is a better pathway, only to find out he's in a worse place. Why? Because he's moved further into darkness. Did you notice all of this happens in the dark? Now that's a fact. So it operates simply at a factual level. This is when this happened. Jesus was arrested at night, and this is all unfolding in the early hours of the morning, the pre-dawn darkness. So it's factual, but there's something else going on here too. This is another level. It's loaded with symbolism. The verse before our passage, we are told that Judas betrays Jesus. We're going to look at Jesus today, but listen to what that verse says. Listen to what Jesus says in verse 53. "Every day I was with you in the temple courts." This is as though arresting him. "And you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns." What does Jesus mean? What does he mean as the moment he's arrested, he says, darkness is reigning? Jesus is talking in spiritual terms. Jesus is speaking of spiritual darkness. He says everything unfolding here, everything that you're about to see is a result of sin. Here is why turning away from Jesus in any form at all, always leads to spiritual night. Put it this way, sin will always take you further deeper into spiritual darkness. And the reason is because it always moves you away from spiritual light. Sin takes you away from God, who is the source of light and life. And so every decision, every step into the darkness is a movement away from the light. It's no coincidence that in the Gospels, Jesus describes hell as being a place of outer darkness. It's Matthew 8, he says that. Because that's the place where our humanness is destroyed forever, where forever We are swallowed by darkness because we're forever separated from the blessing of God's light. It's a swallowing by darkness of sin, and that's what sin always does. So here's what that means. The better pathway that we thought is never better. The reality is that the sin that we betray Jesus for, the sin we betray others for, always turns to ashes in our mouth. It causes havoc. It takes us into the darkness. We're always left with a devastation, with bitterness to the core. Which is why Jesus says this is not neutral. None of what's happening is neutral. See, Jesus had predicted this. He told Peter that he would betray him. He'd warned Peter. Back at the supper, we often call it the Last Supper, the Passover meal, just before this, here is the way he put it to Peter. Back in verse 31, he says this. He says, Simon, Simon, that's the same person, Peter, Simon, Peter. Peter, or Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat. See what he said? He says to Peter, there are forces working here that you cannot see with your eyes. He says everything that will happen, there are spiritual forces in opposition to me and everything that I'm doing. The devil is at work and he wants to sift Peter and the followers of Jesus. Now, the image of sifting is not really one that we're familiar with, but it was a violent one. It was a shaking of the wheat to remove the waste that would just kind of fall out to the bottom. And that's what's happening with Peter. Now, I know this isn't popular language. This isn't familiar language, but I want you to see this because you realize what it means. It means there is always more going on with sin than meets the eye. This is not just a matter, it's not just circumstance. It's not just situation. You can never just view this through the lens of flesh and blood, through the material. The pressure to deny Jesus is always one with a spiritual dimension. This is spiritual warfare. It's conflict. Because the truth is we're always going to be vulnerable here. That's been the pattern from the start. If you go back to the beginning of the Bible, the very first sin in Genesis, and the one that we repeat that's at the heart of so many of our problems, what was it? Abandoning God. Because there was a lie sown that something else was better. Gives you a warning. This passage is a clear warning too, actually. You got to hear them both. Here's the first one. We're not immune from this. And what I mean by that is we're not immune from experiencing betrayal. Think about the significance of Jesus. He was close to 12 people, more than any others. He had other friends, other followers, but he had a close-knit 12 who were around him. But even in such a small, tight-knit group, Judas has just betrayed him to death. Peter has betrayed and abandoned him at his hour of greatest need. And all the other disciples have left him too. Not all betrayal is the same. Not all betrayal is as life-shattering as this. Not all of us will experience those kind of betrayals. But all of us will face the letdowns. 1,000 tiny heartbreaks. The over-promising and under-delivering. The people who we thought were friends disappointing us, abandoning us. Jesus was not immune to it, nor are we. It's part of living in a broken world. But here's a second warning. We're not above doing this either. Being near to Jesus, being around a church, is not enough to stop this. You're vulnerable. We're all vulnerable. And we've got to remember that. That was Peter's mistake. Peter was absolutely certain he would never do this. Do you realize how certain he was? Let me quote him. Back in verse 33, Jesus warns him. He says, "This is what you're going to be tempted to do." But Peter replies, "Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and death." Prison and death, he says. He underestimates his own weakness and vulnerability. So do we. None of us are immune from doing this. We all have the capacity for it. Thinking you don't is the moment the danger really begins. And this is hard, the cause, the results. Where's the hope? Where's the hope? What can we point towards? Here's the last thing, the remedy for betrayal. This story has an end. It has a companion piece. It's not in Luke's gospel. Yes, you find it in the Gospel of John. And right at the end of John's gospel, you get this story. It doesn't finish on this note. Peter had failed Jesus around a charcoal fire. But at the end of John now, after the events of the cross, and then the glorious events of the resurrection morning, on a beach, around another charcoal fire, you get the conclusion to the story. Let me read from John chapter 21 and verse 15. When they'd finished eating, Jesus cooks them breakfast. You love that. When they'd finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you that when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, was following them. This was the one who'd leaned back against Jesus at supper and said, "Lord, who's going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." Do you hear the parallels on the beach? 3 times Peter denies Jesus. And there, sitting after breakfast, Jesus asks him a question 3 times. No coincidence. But be clear on this, Jesus isn't trying to make Peter squirm. He's not trying to get him to feel terrible. That is not what this is about at all, because you know that because of the question Jesus asked him. Did you think that was strange? That Jesus says to him, his question, his repeated question 3 times is, "Do you love me?" Think about that. Why is it not, "Are you sorry? Can I trust you again? Why did you do what you did that night to me, Peter? Do you feel regret? Do you see what that did to me?" None of those. Why is his question, "Do you love me?" Here's why. Because Jesus is going after his heart. His heart. He wants this to go deeper. Here's what I mean by that. It's true that Peter had sinned, but sin is never just a matter of the things that we do. Its roots go deeper. Our actions are only ever a reflection, an outflow of our hearts. Our sin is never just about the thing. So Jesus doesn't want Peter to come away saying, I'm really sorry, betrayal is really bad, I'll really try to never do it again. He doesn't want that. He says, Peter, I want you to see what's happening. I want you to see at a deeper level that sin isn't just a violation of rules, it's a vandalization of a relationship. Peter's denial really wasn't about cowardice and fear. Do you know what it was really about? Lovelessness. Lovelessness. Because in the moment of denial, his heart loved other things more than Jesus. And so Jesus turns to him now and he says, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? You have to see that sin is about lovelessness. But look, that will only get you so far. Because the real remedy is not seeing your lack of love for him. It is seeing the immensity of his love for you. That's what will do it. Right back in Luke, did you notice when it says Jesus looks at Peter? Right in the moment of betrayal, he fixes his eyes on Peter. Now, what is that look? I've spent an inordinate amount of time over the past 3 weeks thinking about that look. Because that look leads to weeping and sorrow. So what was the look? Was it a look of judgment? Was it a look of anger? Was it a look of disappointment? Now, do you know, here's what I think it was. It was the look of love. You say, how can it be a look of love? It led to pain and sorrow. Here's how. It's because the look of Jesus is always a look of love and a look of truth. It is a gaze that will always expose sin because his light always shows the darkness. And that might mean that sometimes it is an uncomfortable gaze. It might lead to bitter tears, but look where it finishes. It leads to sorrow in the short term, but opens Peter up to the forgiveness that comes on the beach. And that's why the look of Christ is always a look of love, even when it convicts you of sin, even when it seems to cut like a knife. It's the surgeon's knife. That's what the look of Jesus is. What does the knife do at first? It damages, it cuts, but why does it do it? Why? Only so the surgeon can bring deeper healing. Only so they can bring true recovery. It's an act of love, not an act of hatred. It's the same with Jesus. His love is willing to go deep enough and hard enough to make the cut and bring the healing. And it's that love which can change you. Look at this. Look at this as we finish. Our failure to love causes betrayal, or let me put that better, our self-love becomes bigger than our love for him. Our betrayal means all too often we walk out on him. It turns away when the cost is too high, when another path seems more appealing. But Jesus is about to demonstrate what true love, what real love looks like. Jesus experiences devastating betrayal, devastation, abandoned, friendless. On the cross, he dies utterly alone. Why? So we can be eternally accepted. He is utterly loyal to us to the point of death. He dies in the darkness so we can live with him in the glorious light. Peter called down curses of denial. Jesus takes on the curse of sin. Even though we are faithless to him, he is utterly faithful to us. And when you see that love, when the Spirit brings that love to bear in your heart, it will melt you. His love will win the heart. His love for you is what will make you loyal to him. And nothing else will. Nothing else has the power to do that. Do you see this? If you're not a Christian, do you see this? Do you realize his love is what will make you a Christian? Do you know that? Do you know that? You can be amazed at Jesus from a distance, impressed by what he taught, impressed by how he lived, but you won't really become a Christian until you see how much he loved you, until you taste his love on the heart. Broken, sinful, faithless, failing though you are, here's the way the New Testament sums it up. 1 John 4, this is love. You want to know what love is? This, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. That's what love is. See his love, it will create yours. It's where following Jesus starts. And you know what? We keep following Jesus by continuing to see that love. His love for us awakens and then sustains our love for him. I wonder, maybe you're sitting there and you're thinking, how will my love ever be bigger for him than it is for those other things? How will it ever be like that? The things that you're tempted to abandon him for, how will you ever love him more than those things? Maybe you think that's impossible. Did you pick up what Jesus said to him as they continue down the beach? Jesus tells him something incredibly difficult. He says to him in verse 18 of John 21, he says, truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you're old, you'll stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said to him, follow me. You know what all that means? Let me decode it. Following Jesus would lead Peter to a place he didn't want to go, which was crucifixion. And yet, he still followed him, even to the end. How? How did the scene in the courtyard not unfold when Peter faced the same kind of pressure again? How could he do what he was incapable of doing the first time? Here's how. The same Peter is going to describe it later on in the New Testament. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 8. Here's what changed. Though you've not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. The love of Jesus, the love that Peter experiences on the beach, creates a tsunami of joy in the heart. A wave of joy. The profoundest of joy, a joy so great it can outweigh all other things. Eclipse every other obstacle and allow you to face all for the sake of him. Do you know the joy that flows from that love? When you come find him this Easter, if you've never known him, come find him. Come discover him. This is a great place to do it. And if you know him, plunge the heart all over again into the love. And let him mold and shape and change you till you know, savor, taste joy inexpressible.